It's the Opperman Report. And now, here is investigator Ed Opperman.
Okay, welcome to the Opperman Report. I'm your host, Private Investigator Ed Opperman. Now, you could find me at Opperman Investigations and Digital Forensic Consulting. If you just email me at oppermaninvestigations@gmail.com. I'm really excited about our guest today, Craig Pittman. And he's got a podcast called Welcome to Florida Podcast. You could find it on all podcast platforms. It comes out on Tuesdays. You can also find him on Twitter at Craig Times, Facebook at Craig Times, and on Instagram at Craig Pittman78. But his website is craigpittman.com. Mr. Craig Pittman, are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
Thank you so much. Hey, tell us about yourself before we get into your books about the cattail and all that kind of stuff. And welcome to Florida, old Florida, how America's weirdest state influences the country, which is a mouthful to begin with. Tell us about yourself. Who is Craig Pittman?
I'm a native Floridian, so if we get interrupted by a biologist coming in to put a tag on me, now you know why. We're an endangered species. I grew up in the north end of the state. I now live down in sort of the south end of the state, and I have spent 40 years chronicling some of the madness that is Florida. I contend that instead of the Sunshine State, we should call it the most interesting state, because I think we can back that up. I've written 6 books about Florida, number 7 coming out next year, and I do the podcast, Welcome to Florida. Our target audience is the 900 new people who move here every day and have no idea what they've gotten themselves into. We try and help people out by educating them about everything from cockroaches to shark bites to we interviewed a python hunter. We've talked to such icons as Carl Hyacin and Desmond Meade and Betty Osceola, and we try and cover everything. Recent shows have covered Tom Petty, Scarface at 40, the infamous Dozier School scandal that inspired Colson Whitehead's novel, The Nickel Boys. So, we're trying to cover everything, and we've been doing it for 4 years, and we're nowhere near running out of Florida stories. I don't think we'll ever run out of Florida stories to tell.
Yeah, I did a show about that Dozier School. That's a fascinating story, man.
Yeah.
Those poor kids over there, they even found buried. The kids were buried under there.
Yeah.
They were doing medical experiments on starving.
Yeah,
yeah.
Huge scandal, and it's inspired a number of novels. There's a more recent one than Colson Whitehead's Pulitzer winner, a woman named Tananarive Due, who grew up in Miami. She had an uncle who died up there, and she's written a horror novel about that area called The Reformatory, and that just came out to great acclaim.
Yeah, I interviewed a couple of the grown men that went to that school, and I said, yeah, everything was so horrible, but they came in every week and they gave us these medical exams. They had all this expensive equipment. You wonder what the hell was going on there, man.
Yeah.
And so I'm pretty new to Florida, so I wish I had known about the Welcome to Florida podcast but when I first showed up down here, because it is a different place. Old Florida, how America's weirdest state influences the rest of the country. What are we going to find in there?
Well, I wrote that in 2016. The premise of it is, yes, Florida is weird. We are America's weirdest state by far. But if you only focus on the funny stuff, if you only focus on, hey, it's the punchline state, you miss all the ways in which Florida is really seriously changing the way things are around the country. I mean, like the first public defenders were here in Florida. The first Native American gambling casinos were here in Florida. NASCAR got started in Florida. Ray Charles learned to play the piano in Florida. I mean, just example after example after example. So, the book is divided up into chapters by subject. So there's a chapter about what it's like to grow up in Florida. There's a chapter about gambling in Florida. There's a chapter about driving in Florida. No, those are not the same chapter. And the funny thing was, my agent pitched this idea to 16 different publishers, and 15 of them said, "No, we don't think anybody will care about Florida. We just don't see that as anything but a regional interest." And thank God one publisher said, "Yes, let's do it." And it came out and made the New York Times bestseller list and got rave reviews in the Times and the LA Times and the Washington Post. And I even got a mention as a clue in one of the New York Times puzzles for their double cross sticks. Another writer I know, Glenn Beck, he saw me at a party and came up and grabbed me by the shoulders and shook me and said, "You are now immortal."
Yeah, did you frame that?
No.
Oh, man, you're crazy.
I couldn't even solve it.
Yeah. That's when you frame it with all the mistakes in it, right? Yeah, I was shocked to find out. I was just driving down to had to go to a art exhibit by May Pang down, I think it was Fort Myers, and I drove by the Thomas Edison Museum. I had no idea that was down here. Yeah,
and Henry Ford was his neighbor.
Right.
Edison lived here part-time, and he talked Henry Ford into coming down and moving in next to him, and the two of them would go out hunting with the tire guy, Goodyear. They'd go out hunting together. If you can imagine that, those three guys driving around on those old roads. And if you get a chance, take a tour of the Edison grounds. It's quite fascinating. And we did a podcast on it. We actually interviewed the current curator.
No, yeah, I would love to.
It's a lovely facility.
Yeah, the Ringling Museum is insanely huge, right on the water. What a beautiful place.
Yes.
And then they have
a big circus section also, because the circus used to winter in Sarasota.
And what about the Dali Museum? Do we know how the Dali Museum wound up down here, Salvador Dali?
A couple of elderly collectors, lived in St. Petersburg, and they donated their collection to make this museum. And so, this very unlikely connection with Dali, who comes from Spain, but they loved his work, and so they set up this museum. And it now has it was in kind of a 70s building, if you know what I mean. They built this beautiful new facility that's hurricane proof, and it's just as surreal as his paintings. I mean, I really encourage you to go visit that place. It's really something to see.
No, I was actually a member for a while. I've only seen the new buildings. I never even knew there was an old building, to say the truth.
Yeah.
I'm only here for a few years. Right before COVID, I showed up. Perfect time.
Yeah.
Now, let me ask you, Craig Pittman, let me ask you a question. Because the way I found you, you wrote this article for Crime Read about Sanibel Island.
Yes.
Right. Now, I only heard about Sanibel Island when I saw that the bridge to Sanibel Island was blown out in the big hurricane that we just had recently, right? And and I said, we're going to rebuild this bridge 24 hours. We're going to rebuild this bridge in a week. And I'm like, what? Are they crazy? What are they talking about? And I've seen pictures of that island, beautiful, with these little shops and bars and stuff that painted those beautiful colors. But what else is going on down there?
Well, as you saw in the Crime Reads piece, what I wrote about was how Sanibel, it was this unincorporated area, and just as beautiful as can be, and quite a few retired CIA agents wound up settling there. They actually trained for the Bay of Pigs invasion in that area, and they kind of sort of fell in love with it and came back down. And when they saw how the place, basically the county commissioners were letting developers have their way with the island, and they said, well, this is wrong. This is going to ruin the place we've retired to. So they actually fought back. They created a city. One of them wound up serving as the first mayor. I mean, it was, it's the one instance where the CIA took over an American island and did it for the better.
Yeah, they had their little coup d'etat down there.
Yeah, exactly.
Are they still running the island?
No. The civilians eventually elected their own. But, I mean, the things that they set up, the limits on development there in order to maintain the island's beauty, they were still in place, and I think helped folks on the island survive the hurricane when it came through, because they had requirements for building and limits on where you could build that enabled some folks to, basically avoid the damage that was done on, say, Fort Myers Beach and other places nearby.
Yeah, and what about those cute little shops and restaurants that they used to have? Are they still standing, or are they all gone now?
It depends. Some are still around, some are not. I was actually down there not too long ago and had dinner at Doc Ford's, which is a restaurant that was started by the author Randy Wayne White, who of course has a character who's a former secret agent and lives on Sanibel. But that one had reopened, but a couple of other restaurants that I really liked were not. One of them was doing takeout. The other one was at least weeks away from reopening, and a lot of the stores were still in trouble as well, trying to rebuild. But they had the folks who run the one bookstore there. They had finally reopened. They reopened in a different location, I think, but they were able to open back up again.
What about the influence of the CIA in the state of Florida? You had all those Miami Cubans, the exiled Cubans were down there. What do you make of all that?
Well, I mean, it was because of our proximity to Fidel Castro and Cuba, and as a result, and we had the Cuban Missile Crisis in '62, which just galvanized the anti-Castro folks, and so the CIA set up a station there in Miami and recruited lots of people, and they had the Bay of Pigs, which was a huge disaster. If you've ever seen the original movie, The In-Laws, I love the part where there's a picture of John F. Kennedy, and it's signed to Vince, "At least we tried," because Peter Falk supposedly came up with the idea for Bay of Pigs. And it continues to reverberate because some of the Bay of Pigs veterans wound up becoming the Watergate burglars.
Right.
They were recruited to burglarize the Watergate Hotel, burglarize the DNC headquarters, and the plans for it were actually laid out in Miami, by G. Gordon Liddy and those guys. So it's quite amazing how things that happened in the past continue to reverberate through the present.
Yeah, many of those same fellows are suspected as well in the Kennedy assassination.
Well, and they certainly pulled off the burglary of Ellsberg psychiatrist to obtain the information that would discredit him for releasing the Pentagon Papers.
For the audience, if you've never seen the movie The In-Laws, it's a hysterical movie from beginning to end.
Oh, it's funny.
Maybe
it's
the last 20 minutes it gets a little dull, but incredible movie. And they tried to do a remake of it. It was horrible.
Oh no, no. The original is the one to watch.
Yeah,
definitely.
but there's
Peter
a
Falk
scene.
and I can't think of his name. The other
Alan Arkin, Peter Falk.
Yes.
There's a scene in the diner where he says, "You left the counterfeit engraving prints in my basement," and Peter Falk's going, "Look, from now on, call it the Thing." And I've used that line over and over my whole life. Listen, from now on, just call it the Thing.
I like it. I like in the when they're in the coffee shop. Peter Falk and the cab driver, and he tells the cab driver, "Oh, I work for the CIA." The guy says, "Well, that must be interesting." He said, "The benefits are great if you live long enough to collect them."
Great, but you got to find the original, man. Otherwise, it's a waste of time.
Yes. Yeah.
So then what do you make of Florida politics, man? All these crazy cast of characters, you got running around here. Are you aware of any scandals or that we should know about in the history of Florida?
There's like a scandal a week out here, man.
My goodness, there is.
Yeah. I always tell people, my general reaction to Florida was formed in my childhood up in the Pensacola area. I grew up in Escambia County, where you actually have scam as part of the name, and one of my really vivid memories was we had a state legislator who decided to run for sheriff. He was a former gospel singer, and his campaign for sheriff on the Law and Order ticket, because this is like '72, his campaign on the Law and Order ticket was disrupted by his arrest for running a cocaine smuggling ring, which he was using to finance his election. And people were like, "Oh yeah, well, it's Florida,"
So, go ahead.
We have constant scandals everywhere you look, and right now our current governor, I don't know if you've heard about this, is claiming is trying to claim that executive privilege allows him to hide records. I mean, one of the hallmarks of Florida government is we have the Sunshine Law, which says basically all government records are supposed to be open for the taxpayers to look at so we can see where they're spending our money. And we've got a governor now who's like, no, I have executive privilege. I can hide whatever I want to. Even though it's not written anywhere in the law, I've got it. And he had his attorneys making that very serious arguments to some appellate court judges this week, and they're like, it's not written in the law anywhere that you can do that. How can you make that argument?
Yeah, as a private investigator, Florida is like a gold mine for open records, man. You can get anything down here.
Yeah. Which is the way it should be everywhere, but it's not.
It's so true. But then again, that's a two-sided sword, too, as well, because I was a witness one time, okay? And this crazy defendant, if you saw her mugshot, she was completely insane, and she had access to all the communications between me and the DA. She can get copies of all our emails and stuff like that. And we had to talk on the phone whenever we had to talk. So this completely insane woman would stop, driving us crazy. It's a two-sided store for sure. What about the Florida man? Go ahead.
Okay. Let me. That's a good segue, because some people think that all these Florida man stories, Florida man calls 911 because strip club won't let him bring in his pet cat, things like that. They think that the only reason we generate these stories is because we have the Sunshine Law. So all those police reports are, public record, and the newspapers send out reporters to look through the police reports, and they find the wackiest ones and publish them. That's not true. After our Sunshine Law was passed, it was picked up by several other states and copied. So we're not the only ones that have that law on the books. But, no other state produces the level of weirdness that we do. So, the factors that create those stories, Florida man in road rage incident runs over self, which that's one of my favorite ones from the game. That one came from the Gainesville Sun. They come from several factors. One is our rapid population growth. When before World War II, we were the least populated southern state, and now, as of 2014, we passed New York. We're now the third most populous state in America. And think about who it is that came here, who moved in. We've got, like I mentioned, the ex-CIA agents who participated in the Bay of Pigs and then came back because they liked the place. We've got the circus people in Sarasota. We've got python hunters, gator wranglers, monkey breeders, spam kings, strip club moguls, uniformed Scientologists, the Hooters wait staff, because they started the first Hooters here in Florida, and we've got 29 electoral college votes. So that motley crew helps to control who gets elected president. We've got our temperatures tend to be fairly mild all year round, so that means people can be out doing crazy stuff all year instead of being cooped up indoors for several months because of blizzards and stuff. We actually have an excess of machetes. I actually called a machete distributor, and they said, yes, we sell more machetes in Florida than anywhere else, which is why they keep finding up as weapons. The bottom line, and this really is kind of the bottom line, we routinely wind up as listed as 49th in spending on mental health treatments in Florida. Yeah. To which I can only say thank God for Texas.
Yeah, there really are no social services down here at all.
Yeah, exactly. So, a lot of people self-medicate, and it usually ends up badly, But, and I always forget to mention, we have more nudist resorts here than any other state. That's the mild temperatures again, but we've got, starting in the 40s with a place called Lake Como Resort in Pasco County. Pasco is my nominee for ground zero for Florida weirdness, and it's also the nudist capital of America. They've got more nudist resorts there than anywhere else, and they regularly run these, nudist 5Ks and things like that. And I mean, it's the nudist resorts in Florida. You can get whatever you want according to your taste. There's the real high-end, expensive places like Caliente. Although how you can tell it's expensive since nobody's wearing clothes, I don't know. And then at the other end of the spectrum, there's the one that's run by a gang of bikers called the Bear Bun Bikers Club, which just really sounds like a bad idea to me. I mean, the word chafing comes to mind, you know.
Yeah, I tell you, Craig Pittman, welcome to Florida Podcast. You must never run out of material.
No, definitely not. I mean, you know, we've talked to all kinds of folks, and we're just barely scratching the surface, you know. And the one problem is sometimes we've got lots of topics, but the hard part is finding someone who could talk about it. It took me 3 years of negotiating to finally get someone to come on to talk about the infamous Johns Committee, which was our version of the McCarthy era. The Johns Committee was this committee of the legislature that was set up to, to attack communism in the civil rights movement. And the NAACP said, well, you're going to have to sue us in order to get our membership records. We're not just going to give them to you. And they were like, oh. So then they said, well, we'll go after gays in the universities instead. And they did, and drove a lot of people out. Rita Mae Brown was a University of Florida student and was driven out by the Johns Committee and went off to write Ruby Fruit Jungle. But the whole thing backfired on them. They put out a report about their findings that was so explicit with its photos and very bizarre. It's bizarre reading too, but it was actually known as the Purple Pamphlet and was classified as obscenity. And the local district attorney said, you can't send that out. That's pornography. But they had people from all over the country writing in saying, could you send me a copy of that? I'd like to see it.
Yeah, that sounds interesting.
Yeah, exactly. So basically they were very quietly shut down and did not meet again after that.
I'd say, Craig, I moved here from Vegas. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So you'd think, right? I've seen it all. But I come down, by the way, people down here drink and smoke more than they do in Vegas. There's 100% more. Okay.
I'm not surprised.
Yeah. But what I also noticed, too, is there's a lot of swingers down here. There's like swinger activity, right? Have you ever covered that?
The Caliente Resort is sort of known for that. You know, they've had They had a conflict between people who are into the swinging lifestyle versus people who consider themselves naturists, and for them it's about health, not about sex. So there's this schism, I guess you'd say, in the nudist world between those two forces, and it sort of rocked Caliente for a while. But yeah, I mean, there's some interesting folks with interesting proclivities around the theme park areas. You'll find congregations of furries. You know, people who are into that. They really like seeing all those mascots dressed up like Mickey Mouse and Tigger and so forth.
Yeah, furries are people with the fetish of, they would like to dress up as animals in animal costumes. Yeah. That's part of their fetish.
So you can see why they'd be attracted to that.
Yeah, that's another thing, too. You got some huge theme parks down here, too. Busch Gardens, you got Universal, you got Disney.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. So, you know, if you're into that kind of thing, that's the place to go. And, I mean, it's interesting. You know, Disney came here. He actually flew over Central Florida on November 22nd, 1963, and said, yes, this is a place we're going to build our new park, and then landed and didn't understand why everybody was crying, but until finally somebody told him about Kennedy. But they when they built Disney World there in what was basically wetlands, it completely transformed the state. And, you know, now that's our number one tourist destination. We get people coming there from all over the world. It actually changed the population there because a lot of Puerto Ricans who were looking for a better life came there and settled around the theme parks to work in the hospitality industry. So it changed the political makeup of that area because they had not been allowed to, you know, Puerto Ricans, they can't vote in the presidential elections, even though that's an American territory. But once they moved to Florida, they could.
You can't declare bankruptcy in Puerto Rico either.
Interesting. Well,
right?
you can in Florida, but the thing is, our laws are set up the way our laws are set up. You can still keep your homestead that way, even if you've declared bankruptcy. So that's why O.J. moved here after he lost. After he was acquitted, he moved to Florida for a while so he could declare bankruptcy and not have to pay the Goldmans and still maintain his home. I mean, it was just a sort of a classic Florida story.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. Florida's the best place to declare bankruptcy.
Yeah. I mean, we, in my book of Florida, I call it the land of 1,000 chances, because a lot of people come here for a second, a third, a fourth chance. They've screwed up somewhere else. They come here and they, declare bankruptcy and try and start over, although usually what they're doing is trying to basically redo what got them in trouble in the previous place. My favorite example is Charles Ponzi, the guy who invented the Ponzi scheme up in Boston. While he was out on bond, came to Florida, got involved in a land fraud. He was selling land. He claimed it was close to Jacksonville. It was like 70 miles away. Most of it was underwater. It's just a classic Florida fraud.
What do you make of all the new people coming down?
Well, I mean, most of them have no idea what they're getting into, and a lot of them, they're bringing with them the values of the place they came from. They're not coming here and saying, I'm going to try and fit in. They're coming here and saying, I'm going to make this place be like what I left. And it doesn't work. You see a lot of the new homes. How can I put this? The folks who have lived here for years, they build houses that are more in keeping with the landscape. They're built to take advantage of the shade and the breezes and that kind of stuff. A lot of the new homes that are being built, they're not like that. And so, they look like homes that are built anywhere. Well, those don't quite fit in. And a lot of them are built on filled-in wetlands, which means that the water that used to go into those wetlands is now being sloshed off onto the neighbors, so they're probably not happy about that. And if there's flooding, which we're having a bigger and bigger problem with these days, it's going to go right where it used to go. It's going to come right into that house that's sitting on where the water used to go. So, it's ironic that you mentioned about Sanibel and Lee County. That's where Hurricane Ian came ashore.
Right.
And did major flooding there. And so the folks who are building back, they're building back in the exact same place in pretty much the exact same way. It's like, do you think there's a problem with that? Did you not learn anything? And so FEMA, everybody counts on the Federal Emergency Management Agency to provide flood insurance if you build in an area that gets flooded. Well, if you are flooded and you put in a claim, then FEMA wants you to build back better, build higher, build more flood resistant, that kind of stuff. FEMA looked at how they're building back in Lee County and said, you're not doing it right, and we're not going to give you any discount on your flood insurance anymore, because they were getting like a 20% discount. And, oh, man, the weeping and wailing and gnashing of teeth, you would have thought they'd enacted, martial law or something. But FEMA said, you're not building back better. You're building it back exactly the same, and you're going to sell it to a new bunch of people. And I have to tell you, there's no law in Florida that says if your home has been flooded, you have to disclose that to a new buyer. So folks may be moving in and suddenly discovering they got a mold problem they didn't know about because they didn't know the place had been underwater.
It seems too when that big building, that big condo in Miami collapsed. You think they'd be
Surfside, yeah.
You think that would still be on the news every night? You know what I mean? Like a big skyscraper.
It was 3 years ago, which is like the Renaissance here. Because things happen so fast. But and in fact, I did a column about this for the Florida Phoenix. Some legislators, including one from Southwest Florida, passed a law that said that local governments have to speed up giving out building permits. They have to basically cut the amount of time it takes to give building permits. It's like, well, don't you think you should give them more time so they make sure that we don't have another Surfside? That wasn't what they were all about.
Yeah, it's it's a corrupt town. It's a corrupt town for sure.
I mean, the legislature is controlled by the development interests.
Yeah.
The governor has, he's famous for saying, I won't back down, but he backs down to every developer that whatever they want, And there was a column just today by the Orlando Sentinel columnist Scott Maxwell saying, we have all these state officials trumpeting how much money they're spending on environmental cleanups. We have so many environmental cleanups because they didn't do anything to stop the polluters before they polluted things. Wouldn't it make more sense to do that and save the money for the cleanups? But instead, we have it all backwards. That's the way we do it in Florida.
I went down to see the Hemingway house in Key West.
Mm-hmm.
You got all these pictures on the walls of Hemingway catching these big giant swordfish, man. You're like 20 feet high, And I said, "Wow, they got that stuff out in the water out here." They go, "Not anymore." And that for a long time. So
well, I mean, and we've had so many pollution problems. Right now, they got a big problem in the Keys with where they have a number of marine species, including endangered sawfish, which look just like you'd expect from like the Flintstones. So, that where they spin around and spin around and spin around, and then they die. It's like they're completely disoriented, and then they keel over. And they haven't quite figured out what's going on yet, but they're pretty sure it's pollution related.
Yeah, and they have so many marine biology schools down here and these conservation schools down here. But then when they graduate, they all go to work for like the oil industry and the energy industry. They go in and they scoop all those guys up, man.
Yeah.
What
like
a
the
racket.
famous bank robber said, "Why do you rob banks?" Willie Sutton said, "Because that's where the money is."
Yeah, what a racket, man. Hey, so one of your books, though, Cattail, The Wild, Weird Battle to Save the Florida Panther. Now, this is a tragic story, man, right? Go ahead.
Well, it starts off that way, but it has a hopeful ending. And I wanted to write this book for 25 years because it's such a great story. The Florida school children picked the panther as our official state animal, and then it very nearly went extinct. Which would be like having the governor's official car stolen. It'd be kind of embarrassing. And so they really pulled out all the stops to try and save it. And the sort of this ragtag band of biologists and veterinarians figured out that what they needed to do was pull off this experiment that nobody had ever tried before and bring in cougars from Texas to crossbreed with them to in a limited way, because they were suffering from genetic defects caused by inbreeding. There were so few of them. There were only 20 panthers left by 1995, and they tried this experiment. They had no idea if it would work, and now we have about 200 panthers wandering out in the wilderness, and they're doing the same because that worked. They're doing that with other species now around the world. It's just this remarkable thing, and the people involved are fascinating too. There's a biologist. There was a panther that was killed accidentally, and she was one of two people that tried to give it mouth-to-mouth resuscitation, which is not a level of commitment to the job you see very often in America these days. There's this old Texas hunter who became very crucial to the effort and who is known for wearing his white Stetson hat everywhere. I mean, everywhere, even in the bathroom. He had a great story about going out to catch the Texas cougars and bring them back in. I'm just going to say the words blindfolded mule and let you use your imagination for the rest. And there was a noted scientist who left state employ under very clouded circumstances and then pops up working for the developers and writes this very influential paper about what sort of habitat the panthers need, and it turns out he threw out 40% of the data because it didn't match his theories. And so he puts out this really badly flawed paper that then becomes the basis for an awful lot of the permits that the feds issue in panther habitat. And ultimately, the Texas hunter and the woman who gave mouth-to-mouth resuscitation and some other folks teamed up to basically bring him down. I mean, it's just a fascinating human story as well as an interesting wildlife story.
Yeah, check that out in Cattail, The Wild, Weird Battle to Save Florida Panther. But wasn't there something, too, about the land that they had allotted? Do you think the land where these cats would want to live on? Like now they're developing that land?
Yeah, I mean, the development is just off the charts. And in fact, we were to the point where there are two projects now that were in the planning stages that would, according to Fish and Wildlife Service calculations, would wipe out 25 panthers a year. Well, because of all the increased traffic. Well, if you've only got 200 and you wipe out 25 a year, they're going to be all gone pretty quickly. And fortunately, there was a court case that stopped them, at least for now. So we'll see what happens.
What about the gators?
Oh, they're a huge success story. Believe it or not, alligators were on the first endangered species list.
Really?
Yeah, and now we've got so many that they're off the endangered list, and in fact we actually have what's called the Statewide Nuisance Alligator Program, or SNAP for short. If anybody ever tells you bureaucrats don't have a sense of humor, tell them about the SNAP program, where if there's a gator that's shows up near a high school or gobbles up Aunt Lonnie's little yip dog, they send a trapper out to capture it. And if it's above 4 feet, they'll kill it. And if it's below 4 feet, they're supposed to relocate it somewhere where it's not posing a danger to everybody. And it's spring is when a young gator's fancy lightly turns to thoughts of love, and so they show up just about anywhere. There was one the other day that was caught on camera walking through a credit union drive-through. They were joking about, "I'm sorry, sir, you don't have an account here. You can't make any withdrawals." And they show up in a lot of the Florida Man stories, too. The classic one being the guy in, I think it was Loxahatchee, who thought it would be really funny if he caught a little 4-foot gator and then drove up to the Wendy's drive-thru and tossed it at the woman behind the counter. And he was later arrested for assault with a deadly weapon, the weapon being the alligator.
Yeah, I interviewed the woman who did the movie about the Florida woman who had the gator as a pet over in Lakeland.
Oh, yeah.
Lakeland, Florida, over there.
Yeah. Elvis, wasn't that his name? Elvis?
Yeah, I think it was. Yeah. She put him in a baby carriage and wheel him around.
Yeah, and she'd dress him up, and she'd also have him sitting on a 4-wheel drive vehicle.
And she had a huge, like a 10-foot tank in her living room. So I says, what did that place smell like when you walked in?
Yeah.
You could just imagine.
On the other hand, she never has to worry about burglars, does she?
That's right. Well, I don't think she had much to steal.
Yeah, there's that too.
The home was built with reclaimed resources, and she built it herself, which is another Florida thing,
Oh, yeah. Well, and here's the thing is, and people don't know this, but I was doing a story about alligators for the Florida Humanities Magazine forum. There's research going on now about alligator blood. Alligators, they don't live in the cleanest environment, and yet they very seldom get any infections. So how come? Well, it's because they have these substances in their blood that are very efficient at fighting off infections. So now they're trying to copy that and use it, turn it into something they can use for humans to fight off infections, including COVID. There you go. So the alligator you save may save you.
There you go. You wrote another book too, Manatee Insanity: Inside the War Over Florida's Most Famous Endangered Species. These manatees. In fact, I lived in Manatee County. They named the whole county after them for a while. Yeah.
And didn't have any for a while. There was a celebration coming up, and they realized, hey, and they went out and checked in the wild and couldn't find any manatees. So they contacted. This is in the '60s. They contacted a guy in Miami, and he said, yeah, I actually have a couple of manatees I can bring over there for your celebration. They said, yeah, please do. And so he brought them over. I'm sorry, he only had one, but it was pregnant. And so then while it was here, it gave birth. Well, he only had a permit for one manatee, and the state said you can't keep the second one. So he donated it to Manatee County, and it became the county mascot. It's Snooty, the most famous captive manatee ever. Lived to be, I think, 68 years old. 69. It was 69. And remembered tricks that had been taught back when Harry Truman was president. It's quite amazing. Quite an amazing story.
And what is the problem with because the boats go over them with the propellers hit them, right? Is that the problem?
That accounts for about a quarter of all manatee injuries every year.
Wow.
And, Florida has more registered boats than any other state for obvious reasons. And a lot of the boat, there's no requirement you get a license to drive a boat, unlike a car. So a lot of the people driving boats around, they don't know what they're doing. They don't know where they're going. They don't know what's in their way. And they run over the manatees. The manatees, they live in the water, and they don't move nearly as quickly as the boats do. And so, a lot of people don't follow the rules. When they'll see a sign that says slow manatee zone, they won't slow down. So they'll run them over. And so you just about can't find a manatee that doesn't have scars on its back or on its fluke from being hit by boats. And sometimes if they hit them hard enough, it'll shatter their bones. Their bones are very fragile. And it'll kill them. The other problem they have is the big problem we've had in the last few years is we had these massive toxic algae blooms that were fueled by the pollution in the water, and it shaded out and killed the seagrass that the manatees eat. And so the Indian River Lagoon over on the state's east coast used to be the most productive estuary in America, and they've lost tens of thousands of acres of seagrass, and so the manatees that were living there, they were dying of malnutrition. They had like 2,000 that died, and it caused this big crisis. So the state's big solution to this was, we'll feed them lettuce. So they got people to donate money so they could throw lettuce to them. It's like, but this is so Florida. You know how we pay for our manatee science, and this is true for panthers too. How we pay for panther science?
Yeah. I don't. I'm afraid to ask.
License plates. We pay for it through the sale of specialty license plates. There's a Save the Panther plate and a Save the Manatee license plate, and those help. Those basically, that's where the money comes from for manatee science and for panther science to be done. God forbid we actually put money into it from the tax revenue. No, we're going to let people pay for it. And so I contend that there is a likelihood that a car with a panther license plate ran over and killed an actual panther at some point. It's just because the odds are pretty much that would have happened.
You mentioned how these guys, they drive these boats around and they don't know how to drive. If you ever hang around one of those boat launches, just for a few hours, you're going to see something crazy.
Oh, yeah. I can't count how many times I've seen stories about people who wind up with their vehicle in the water.
Yeah, tow trucks every day, yeah.
Yeah, because I was putting my boat in the water and I messed up and somehow it went back. It just kept going. I couldn't stop it, over and over and over again. Yeah, it's
But now you talk about raising money. You drive around, you see these big boat dealerships, I guess you call them, right? And they're huge. And they got every boat on there has got to be at least $300,000. First of all, who's buying all those boats? And second of all, can't they put a little tax on those boats to pay for everything everywhere?
You know what? Our former governor, Charlie Crist, when he was in the legislature, he tried to pass a law that required that all boats sold in Florida have a cage around the propeller.
Okay.
Because that would help keep them from hurting the manatees. And the boating industry was so politically powerful, basically, he said they came down on him like a ton of bricks. And that bill never made it out of committee. And so he said, I learned then that they didn't care about manatees, they cared about making money. And that's always been the case. Charlie wound up becoming a big champion for manatees and stopped an effort to take them off the state's endangered list. But then the feds took them off in 2017, and then right after that we started having the big die-off. So there's been a big clamor to put them back on.
Yeah, how much could it cost to put a little cage around the propeller? Why would you be against that? It just makes no sense. And you destroy the beauty of it. There's a lot of really beautiful places down here, man.
Oh, yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
And what about like these little beach towns? You see them, and some of them are still quaint, but little by little they're just getting overrun. The traffic and just the misery of them. You're losing everything down here. How does someone like you, who've been here for 40 years, how does that make you feel?
Well, I mean, there was a sort of a golden era starting in '85 up to about 2011 where we actually had a growth management agency. Legislators and our governor at the time, Bob Graham, they said, we're killing the goose that lays the golden egg. We're letting growth run wild. And we can't do that anymore. We've got to control where it goes. We've got to make sure that there are roads to accommodate the new people, sewers to accommodate the new growth, and the new growth should pay for itself. So there should be impact fees. That all makes sense, doesn't it? It's just common sense. And so while that happened, there actually was government planning for where growth was allowed to happen. And there were limits. And whenever somebody went over the limits, they got their hands slapped and had to go back and start over. In 2011, a guy named Rick Scott was elected governor, and he came in, and all he could talk about was jobs. You asked him what day it was, and he'd say jobs. You asked him what 2 plus 2 equal, he'd say jobs. And he insisted that we had to get rid of the Growth Management Act in order to stimulate the economy. And so he and the legislature repealed the Growth Management Act, shut down the growth management agency, the Department of Community Affairs, and growth has been running wild ever since. And the developers kind of run things.
And Rick Scott, wasn't his previous job like stealing some kind of medical insurance? Wasn't that his
it's
job?
Funny you mention that. He was sitting next to a criminal defendant in New York this week.
No, my goodness, no.
Yeah, Rick Scott. He was the CEO of the company that wound up paying the largest fine for Medicare fraud in U.S. history, but he was not himself charged and had actually quit the company by the time they were charged. And so. But while he was being questioned in a civil deposition, he took the fifth 75 times, which hard to forget that. So maybe that's why he feels sympathy for the guy who's on trial in New York right now. I don't know.
That would make a great vice president.
There you go.
With our other friend there. Well, that brings me to a question, too. You got these people in Florida. They all seem so damn laid back, man. They love to drink. They love to party. They love their strip clubs. They love all this kind of stuff. You'd think we'd have legal marijuana here. Everyone has got a medical marijuana card with their ailments, right? Everyone's smoking it up 24 hours a day.
It's on the ballot. It's on the ballot this fall. We'll see what happens.
And I bet so many of these guys have criminal records, too. Why are they so right-wing? How do they elect these right-wingers?
How can I explain this? The people, every election, you have a different set of voters. Because remember, we're getting 900 new people coming in every day. And so the people who elected folks 2 years ago, it's a different set that's electing them this time. And a lot of people make their choices based on who has the best TV ad. So, Rick Scott won 2 terms as governor. He's won 1 term as senator. He's running for re-election as U.S. senator, and each time he just barely squeaked back in, and it's all because of this last-minute deluge of TV ads that he's paid for. He's the richest member of Congress, so he's got money to burn, and he throws lots of money into the race and buys lots of TV ads, and that seems to sway the people who are about to go vote. I would like to see people vote for what's in their own interest, but we don't seem to do that in Florida.
Got a lot of colorful characters down here.
Oh, yeah.
Tiger King, Roger Stone lives down here, Donald Trump, Jeffrey Epstein, all these colorful characters. Can you name other big famous people that people would be shocked that they have a place in Florida?
Stephen King.
Wow, see?
Stephen King has a place, I believe it's on Casey Key down near Bradenton, and has actually done quite a bit of work to help the Bradenton Public Library.
Really?
Yeah. John Gresham has a place up in North Florida and has written a couple of books that are set there. Let's see, who else? Tiger Woods.
Yeah.
The place where his wife hit him with the golf club was here in Florida. So that becomes part of the cavalcade of Florida crime.
And by the way, too, it was the agent for the Tiger Woods mistress, Gina Rodriguez, who was the agent for Stormy Daniels in that other case up there in New York
City.
Yeah.
It's all connected.
Oh, it's a small world, brother.
Al Capone.
Oh.
Al Capone was living in Miami. Al Capone was living in Miami, actually planned the St. Valentine's Day massacre while living in his Miami Beach mansion. So, we got that going for us. It's just amazing to me that people don't. But here's the thing: is a lot of these stories, when they get covered, the stories don't mention, and they're in Florida. It just says. It mentions the name, and so you don't know that there's a Florida connection. Jeff Bezos now lives in Florida. He grew up here. He started his first business in Florida, and then went off to Seattle, for a while. But now he's back. He's bought this island mansion near Miami, and he keeps popping up. Here's hoping to, spend some of that money on good stuff in Florida.
Yeah, P. Diddy's got a place down here, too, as well. We only got a few minutes left, and one of your other books is The Scent of Scandal, Greed, Betrayal, and the World's Most Beautiful Orchid, Florida History and Culture. What's going on with that?
That is about, I have to mention that, as far as I know, that book is the only one ever classified as true crime / gardening. I always feel bad for the bookstore clerks trying to figure out where to shelve it. Yeah. It's about Selby Botanical Gardens in Sarasota, which became the first scientific institution in America to be charged with wildlife trafficking, basically. I mean, they were charged with helping a guy to smuggle in this valuable orchid. And the scientist, one of the scientists involved, actually got a worse sentence out of it than the actual smuggler did. This guy named Kovac, he lived in West Virginia. He had met this guy from Florida named Lee Moore, who calls himself the Adventurer, and together they went down to Peru, and they Kovac stops at this roadside stand, and this woman brings out this gorgeous orchid like nobody had ever seen before. It's like 2 feet high. It's got this purple flower on top of it, and it's a type of orchid that's rare anyway. They're called lady slippers. And so he buys it for like $3.60. Lee Moore tells him, get that up to Selby Gardens and they'll name it for you. And so he smuggles it through the Miami airport. And this isn't long after 9/11 either. But he smuggles it through the Miami airport with his dirty underwear and takes it to Selby Gardens in Sarasota and asks them to name the plant for him. And so they do. And they write up this description, rush it into print to beat a rival into print to actually be the ones with the honor of naming this spectacular new orchid. And then they name it the Phragmipedium Kovacii, so the guy gets his name on it, which one scientist later told me is tantamount to putting a sign on his back that says, please come arrest me. Because the government of Peru filed a formal complaint with the U.S. government, and the feds show up at Selby Gardens and start issuing subpoenas for a grand jury investigation. Agents raid Kovac's greenhouse up in West Virginia. They confiscate 300 orchids and his proposed TV treatment for a new reality show starring him called The Orchid Hunter. It's just crazy. The whole thing is crazy. The scientists at Selby Gardens wind up turning on each other. Some of them cut deals to testify. It's just
witness protection.
Yeah. I mean, and meanwhile, Selby, which depends on big donors, suddenly the big donors turn cold. They're like, we don't want to have anything to do with if you're a bunch of criminals. So it's became a big crisis for them as well. When I was writing the book, they had actually stopped. I mean, they were created basically to help orchid growers. The whole idea of their creation was, we're going to be in the business of orchid science and orchid, that kind of stuff. And they had realized this is a big problem, so they decided, we're going to drop orchids. We're going to do African violets instead. And so I went to the place to get a backstage tour, basically, and I met the chief scientist, who was an African violet expert, and he had a bumper sticker on his car that said, "Ask me about my gesneriads," that's the scientific name for African violets. And I said, I don't mean to be a smart aleck, but do people ask you about your gesneriads? And he just looked totally downcast. He said, no, everybody thinks it's a disease. They soon changed back to orchids. They're back onto the orchid feed now.
Well, I'll tell you this, Selby Gardens, man, is I didn't realize.
It's gorgeous.
It's right on the water again. Beautiful place. There's so many beautiful places like that. But I understand there was an attempted assassination using a pesticide against Craig Pittman. I think that's right. About Craig Pittman. We're out of time. Yeah. Okay.
Sure. Oh, no, I was just going to say, I actually went and did a presentation about this book at Selby Gardens to the Sarasota Orchid Society, and I told them, this is a true crime book, and this is the scene of the crime. You're here.
It's probably for sale in a bookshop. Whatever. Let's move on. Craig Pittman, welcome to Florida podcast. You can find it on Tuesday. This guy must be really funny on radio, man, when he's not being interrupted by Ed Opperman. Okay. On all podcast platforms on Tuesdays. You can find him on Twitter at Craig Times, on Facebook at Craig Times, and on Instagram at Craig Pittman 78. Hey, thank you so much. I really enjoyed this, man.
My pleasure.
I'm having a rough week. I really enjoyed this.
I did too. And, since you're a new resident, let me just tell you, welcome to Florida.
Thank you, sir. I'm heading out.
Okay.
Next bus out. Good night, my friend.